Greetings, Retro Lover. This is Ethan, aka the Ghost Mall, coming to you once more from my home studio here. And this is going to be another video in my Retrowave music production series. And in this series, what I like to do is to show you through my own music, through the stuff that I'm working on here at the Ghost Mall, everything that I know personally about making retro-inspired music, whether that be about composition, songwriting, arrangement, the production process, mixing, mastering, basically everything that goes into creating music with a retro-inspired sound. I want to show you everything that I know personally. And so this video in particular is going to be a follow-up to my last one in this series, as well as an addition to my Work in Progress Wednesdays series, because it's Wednesday and this tune that I'm going to dissect for you is indeed a work in progress. But in any case, in my previous video, which I'll be happy to link up in the cards and in the description of this video, I was also breaking down a instrumental Retrowave work in progress piece. And I wanted to focus in that video on simplicity, which is a big tenet of my own music production philosophy, but in particular, how simplifying things in your music can help you accentuate certain dimensions of it, specifically space, the feeling of space that is conveyed through your song, and also the unique textures or timbres of the instruments and parts that you use. And people really enjoyed that video, and so I'm going to go ahead and sort of expound upon that using a different song today. And what I want to share with you are some ways, some specific techniques really, to first create greater character, add sort of especially a lo-fi or retro sound to your instrumentation. I'll show you some of my favorite plugins for that or techniques for that. And then also ways to highlight the space in your song and really make the ambience, reverbs and delays and stuff stand out as their own unique elements in the mix. So yeah, if you haven't checked out the previous video, I'll be sure to link that up, and you might want to maybe watch that first so you know where we're jumping off from in this video. But this piece of music is also, I think, going to end up being part of an EP with the piece of music I featured in that. Both of them are akin to another release that I did, a single last year called After Hours. They're sort of down-tempo, kind of haunting or mysterious sounding retro-inspired music, kind of, again, as I often mention, inspired by the vacant or abandoned retail stores that I find so inspiring, hence my name, The Ghost Mall. But in that last video, it was a piece called Reflections, and this one is tentatively titled Retrospect. So before I talk anymore, let me go ahead and play you back this piece so you can get a feel for it. And then I'm going to break down instrument by instrument, in particular focusing, as I said, on the unique methods of getting cool textures or timbres and highlighting the space in the song. Okay, here we go. And there you have it. So that is a work in progress here at the Go Small, tentatively titled Retrospect. And as you can see, it's so far a very simple arrangement, very much a work in progress. I already have an idea about some of the things I want to add to it, and I've kind of been experimenting here in this folder called Ideas. So it will be more fleshed out as I, complete it. But having said that, I do like to keep things simple, and the reason being, again, one of the reasons that is that when you keep things simple, you really do create the opportunity for each individual element or instrument to stand out, to have its own unique character, to have its own, to take up its space basically in the arrangement and to stand out, have at least a moment to stand out. And then speaking of space, you leave ample room for the space around your instruments, however you create it, however you design it, using ambient effects, to also have their own character and to also stand out. So let me tell you some specific ways that I did that, accomplish that in this arrangement. In an effort to go beyond the last video, I want to show you some particular techniques. So let's go ahead and start with this vocal sample. And I'm going to show you one of the best ways that you can go about making the ambiences that you use, the delays and the reverbs, poke through from time to time. Okay, so this is effectively the melody for these portions of the song. And what this is it's a vocal sample. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the ambience for now, but I'm going to leave on my other processing. And as with many of the other times that I use samples in my music, and as I said in the previous video in this series, I use pre-recorded loops and samples very sparingly, usually only one or two things per song, because I prefer to perform and record my own parts as much as possible, sequence my own drums, play the keys, play the bass, play all the ear candy parts, play the guitars myself for the most part. And I usually use loops for things that I can't create on my own. Sometimes it's percussion loops, sometimes it's like a lo-fi beat with a cool texture. Often it's sound effects. And then sometimes I like these little vocal samples. And so those usually come from this plugin called Noise, which is a great library, sort of a subscription service where you get access to all of the ever-growing library of samples they have. So just so you know, if you were wondering where I got this from, let me just play you the sample real quick. So it's just a very simple kind of melancholy, haunting vocal phrase. And actually, let me turn off the inserts for a minute so you can hear what it was like just when I found it. And of course, Noise works where it syncs pitch and time to your current session in the DAW. So that's what it sounds like here. And then how did I go about bringing out more of the sort of unique timbre I wanted and creating an awesome space around it? Now, if you're not familiar with the word timbre, essentially, timbre is the quality of an instrument which makes it set apart from other instruments. It's what makes a guitar versus a flute versus a piano playing the exact same note in the same register in the same octave sound different. Another analogous word that I like to use is texture. So if I sing a note and some other vocalist sings the same exact note, you're going to notice that not only are they unique, but you could probably, if you were familiar with our voices, tell us apart immediately. And that's because of the unique timbre or texture to our voice. And there are ways to enhance the existing timbre or texture of an instrument in your mix, in your production, or to really dramatically alter it to create a different kind of an effect. And so in this case, as you heard with just the raw sample, I hope you could hear it, it has a bit of a graininess to it. Check this out. Kind of a graininess, kind of a noisiness to it, as well as like a thinness. And so what that put me in mind of was a bit crushed sound. So there are two ways you can go with this, right? You can either take your source sound and do battle basically with it. And if you are like, oh, this is poorly recorded, or this just isn't sounding the way I want it to in my production, I'm going to have to alter it. Maybe it doesn't have enough lows, so I'm going to use an EQ to add some lows. Or you can go like, let's play up these qualities of the sound. Let's take it further. And that's what I did here. So first thing I did was just add a little bit of high pass EQ. I do that on a lot of sources, especially if it's a melody. But then this is what I decided to drop in here. This is the stock bit crusher within Studio One. And I have a few different bit crushers, but this actually is my favorite. It just happens to be the stock one in Studio One. And so what I did is I turned the bit depth down to 8 bits. I used the downsample knob just to introduce as much of the sort of like noisy distortion as I can stand, because as you can see, it's just a hair. You can really overdo this. And then I've turned the mix knob down. But let's go ahead and take a listen with this on and how the sample sounds with it. Bypass. Activated. You can hear that breakup that happens after the phrase. And I really like that, actually. I feel like it seems like a transmission coming from somewhere that is breaking up. There's something going on with it. And when you add the ambience around it, which I'll get to in a minute here, it highlights that, and I like that. So you can use all manner of different kinds of distortion or saturation to add character to your sounds. Tape has one kind of character, tube has another, transistor, or something like a bit crusher. And this accomplished something more as well. If I take it into the mix, you're going to hear that in a weird way, the bit crusher actually added some lows, which made it sound a little less thin and a little more like there was more body to the vocal. So let me play you back without the bit crusher a little bit here. Very, very thin. And you'd expect that something that's introducing harmonic distortion would make it sound thinner, but weirdly, this bit crusher with the settings I used gives it a little body, I think. Okay, so that was a way on this main melody part, this vocal sample, that I tried to take what I saw already was there as part of the texture that I liked and enhance it. Now let's talk about space. And I want to introduce you to one of my very favorite techniques, like I said, for making ambience poke out. I'll play it for you. I want you to listen between the vocal phrases and see if you can hear the delay. There's one delay on this and one reverb on this. I want to see if you can hear them suddenly poke out, and then I'll talk to you about how I achieved that. Can you hear that? Can you hear those things come up in the spaces here between the vocal phrases? One more time, let's solo it with the effects. It'll become very clear when I do it this way. Right there. See how those ambiences sort of swell up to fill in the space? All right, so let's talk about how to do that. So first I need to, here's the vocal sample and here are the two effects. I need to unsolo safe these so we can hear them individually. Let's go ahead and start with the delay. This is coming from one of my top two favorite delay plugins. This is UVI's Relayer. Anyone who's been following me for a while knows that I love UVI's stuff. And between this and Native Instruments Replica XT, I pretty much have all my delay bases covered. This is a very simple eighth note delay, but what's making the difference is over here on this panel. You'll see this has a built-in ducker. Now, let's go ahead and just take a quick listen to just the delay here. Hear how it leaps out like that? Watch over here on the ducker, watch this gain reduction meter. So that's what it is. It's this process of ducking your ambiances so that while the main instrument is playing or singing, in this case, the vocal sample is actually, singing, the ambiances are being pushed down. They're being compressed. And when the singing stops and you're in between phrases, and this is the time when you would hear the ambience, in a real setting, it becomes thrust forward, so the listener immediately becomes aware of it. Now you have to really finesse the attack, decay times, the threshold, and the amount, and really, this is a skill that requires some time, because to set these properly, where the release happens, where it bounces back on time, and where you're ducking enough to get it out of the way, but not to make it inaudible, because if you make it inaudible and then suddenly this swells back up, it's a very artificial sound. But that's what's making the difference. And I did something similar with the reverb. Let's swap over to the reverb for a second. Now, this is coming from if I had to say what's my very favorite reverb plugin for making retro music, it's this. This is the RC48 from Softtube, but it's actually sold under Native Instruments brand. And they also have the RC24. This is basically a recreation of like a Lexicon reverb, the 480, and it has some amazing presets in it. And this one's called Parking Deck. And when I want that super expansive, like this is a vacant shopping mall kind of a reverb sound, which would be ideal for vaporwave, or in my case, for my nostalgic retrowave sounds, I like to grab this preset. So this is the Parking Deck preset. I'm going to solo up the verb, but I'm going to turn off the way that I ducked it for a second. Let's listen to that. It sounds just gigantic, right? And there's also a lot of noise there. Well, most of that is coming from the bit crusher on the vocal, but also in the options, you can turn on or off quantization noise, which is a feature of the old original unit. We're talking the early days of digital rack mounted reverb. And it's just another way of adding that sort of retro character to it. Sounds great. Super expansive, very wide stereo image. But then I used this compressor. This is just the Neutron compressor from Isotope. And in order to accomplish ducking away this reverb, which doesn't have a built-in feature for that, I've put the compressor after the reverb on this aux with the reverb, and I have side chained it. So basically what that means is that I'm sending a copy of the vocal through an aux send here at full volume. So this one's going to the verb to actually get the sound of the verb. This is going to the delay to get the sound of the delay. This is going into the sidechain of the compressor following the reverb. You'll see sidechain is activated. And what that means is that while the main dry vocal is singing, it's going to push down the reverb signal and then allow it to bounce back up according to the release time here, which I set by ear, in between the vocal phrases. So let's listen to that now with it engaged. And you can watch the gain reduction trace here. And you'll see it pop back up here in between vocal phrases. It does it really nicely. And what that means is that it's a way of allowing the vocal itself to have its featured moments, and then the ambience on the vocal to have their featured moments in between. They don't step on each other. The reverb, that huge reverb, isn't washing out the main vocal, but we also haven't had to set it in such a way that then in between vocal phrases, you're like, oh, I wish I could hear more of that awesome space. Well, it swells back in, it pops back in. So that is one of my favorite techniques for ensuring that the space that you take the time to tailor and give its own character in your tune then can stand out. One more time, let's listen to those together with the delay. And one more feature here is after the delay, I put pan shaper here from Cable Guys. And so the delay actually pans, not hard left and right, but back and forth about more than 50% left and right. Let's see if you can hear that. Hear it going left to right. just to create a little more movement, a little more sense of space. So, yeah, so those were the techniques that I used. I really took the time to craft them, to treat the reverb, to treat the delay as their own unique elements, right? And to then use this technique of ducking to allow them moments where they can stand out. And just switching back to the notion of texture or timbre for a minute here, let's go ahead and listen to the delay soloed up one more time, because I also made sure to give it a bit of its own character, and the relayer has a really cool feature for that. Okay. It has a sort of very thin, distorted kind of sound. That's coming from this color section. If I turn that off, it still has that bit crushed character because it's a delay of the original signal. But this color section has a bunch of different IRs that you can choose, these device tones, like a laptop speaker or an old telephone or a walkie-talkie. And I chose this one, Device Digital 2, because I liked it had a slightly rounded off kind of a sound, but still lo-fi. I also high-passed it quite a bit. And it just fit in there really nicely. So yeah, so that's how I took what was the primary element here, this sort of vocal sample melody, and gave it its own texture with the bit crusher, and gave it some delay, gave it some reverb, but I made sure that those had character using the RC48 and using the relayer, using that digital device color on the relayer, using the quantization noise setting on the RC48, and then using ducking to bring them down when the vocal was in and bring them back in the spaces in between. Okay, so let me tell you about, I'm not going to go through every single element I think here, but I do want to tell you about some of the other ways I used techniques in this production to enhance texture and space. Let's come here to the main chord playing instrument, which is this Rhodes. It's a Rhodes, if you can believe it. Let's solo that up. Now you're going to hear it sort of swell in. And that's thanks to this. Watch the cutoff. All right, so that is a very characterful kind of a sound, right? Lots of texture there. Let me break down for you how I did that. So first of all, let's turn these off. What's the raw sound? This is coming from the AAS Lounge Lizard, which is an excellent modeling VST for electromechanical pianos, like a Rhodes or a Wurlitzer. Typically for those type of sounds, or really any acoustic instrument, I tend to prefer sample-based instruments, like an acoustic guitar, I think it's hard to digitally model things like that. But in this case, they did an excellent job of using modeling technology to replicate those electromechanical sounds. And it's a great sound by itself. They really nailed that attack sound and the tremolo sound. But, that's a very traditional kind of a sound, like a maybe late 70s, early 80s kind of a ballad would be. So I mangled it to death using my very favorite tool for retro transformation, if you will, which is the RC20 Retro Color from XLN Audio. And if that was the before, then here's the after. Pretty cool, right? I pretty much threw almost everything in the kitchen sink at it. So this awesome plugin has noise, wobble, distort, digital, space, and magnetic knobs, each with a lot of different controls. And I just sort of like put them into taste here, but it gives you the wow and flutter of old tape. It gives you some bit reduction. It gives you a reverb sound here. That's the space. Anything that you could want. You can mimic vinyl sounds. You can mimic tape sounds. You can mimic the digital distortion of old samplers. And yeah, so I really just sort of mangled it, but I dialed the magnitude back a little bit so that it wouldn't be 100%. So I got it at 75% here. and just came up with a sound that I liked. It has a really nice decay to that reverb too. So I accomplished both creating a cool retro texture and creating a nice big space with one plug in there. Now I added some more stuff. I high passed it a little and added some air to it with an EQ, compressed it a tiny bit, just a 2-to-1 ratio using the neutron compressor again. And then I used the Air Vintage filter for a filter sweep. So if I turn on the automation lanes here, you're going to see right here, this is the filter sweeping in, and it needed a little volume compensation there too. Or watch the cutoff until when all the other instrumentation and the drums drop in, we've got the cutoff way back up at the top. It's nice and pretty in an old, ugly, retro kind of way, right? And what's more retro really than a vintage filter sweep, right? Like you might find on an old analog synth. So yeah, so that was another one of the main elements. I used RC20 to give it a cool character and some space, and the vintage filter sweep as an added kind of bonus. Let's look at a couple more elements here. Let's look at the drums. This gives me a chance to talk about just a really neat, awesome little plugin here that I've been looking forward to using in a production that I could talk about on this channel. And unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, it's been discontinued. But this is SpecDrums from SampleScience, I believe it is. They make so many neat things, just really unique kinds of little VST instruments. And what this is these were drum samples from a ZX Spectrum computer. Super retro. There were a few different, I think they were like cartridges that you could get for the ZX Spectrum with different drum sets on them. The original Electro, Afro, and Latin kits. And what these were originally from, I can tell, is an Oberheim DMX. But listen to the quality that having been sampled into an old retro computer gives them. Super crunchy, super thin, definitely even more lo-fi than the original Oberheim DMX was. And I love that. But, by themselves, they were definitely too thin, too small. So what did I do to give them more presence, more personality, and more space? All right, so let's start to add the inserts here. First, I used Slate VMR to do some good old parallel compression with the FG stress. Just kind of integrated things more. Then I used FabFilter Saturn, which is my favorite saturation plugin. It's super versatile. It has a learning curve, but it can do everything from tape to tube and multiband. It's super awesome. But I just used a little warm tape, which is always nice on drums here. I added a lot of body. And then let's talk about the first stage of space I gave this. So this is a really neat plugin, a stock Studio One plugin. Again, I'm totally into using stock stuff when you can. This is called Mix Verb. It's good for kind of like shorter chambers or, room kind of sounds, but it has a built-in gate. So here's the sound without it that I tailored. Sounds like a kind of a metallic, kind of a chamber kind of a sound. But then I added the gate, right? That's super retro. And let's check that out. It has this real quick kind of pumping kind of a feel to it. Added width to it, added space to it, but it also added groove to it. So that isn't the only reverb on here though, but let's listen to that in the mix with just this reverb. Bypass. Back in. It definitely made the kit sound bigger and it added some groove, but it also sounds unnaturally dry. So what I did was I created a send and sent it to another instance of that parking deck preset from the RC48. And now we're getting somewhere. Let's listen to that. I love that. Nice lingering sound on the high end, makes you feel like you're in a big expansive space. So that's another thing I wanted to mention to you. So we've already talked a little bit about ducking and panning as ways that you can highlight your space sounds, your ambiances, but you can also layer them. And one thing that I really like to do is to have some kind of a shorter sound embedded within some kind of a bigger sound, longer sound. And this is a good example. So the mix verb is giving us a short, artificially truncated, gated reverb sound, which provides its own unique feature to the sound. I like to think of these shorter ambiances as actually just a part of the original sound, like you're adding something to the original sound. And then the big space, the space around the sound, is coming from this parking deck preset. And another example is recently I did a remix where on the main vocal in the verses, what I did was, a lot of people would say you go delay into reverb, right? And most of the time, I think that makes sense. But what I did here was I had a very short, super short reverb, also from the RC48, I believe. And then I put that into a delay, like a dub style delay. And it sounded really neat. And actually, there's another example in here. So let's move on from the drums and look at this string sound. This is actually interesting because it's coming from Silent One, which is one of my all-time favorite virtual analog VST plugins. But to me, this doesn't sound like an analog synth. It sounds almost like sampled strings. Pretty cool, right? Almost sounds like a little like chamber ensemble. And it already, let me take off the send. It already has a little bit of reverb itself. I like that reverb. It actually adds a lot to the sound. Here's without. That's a really cool sound itself, a very staccato, dry sound. In a different tune, that might actually be ideal. But this preset came with this reverb on. It's nice, but then I further sent it into that same parking deck preset. And then it feels expansive and like it's swirling around, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. So yeah, another thing to play around with, along with adding saturation to your ambiances, like I did with the digital device sound on the delay for the vocal or the quantization noise on the reverb. You can add saturation. You can add panning to your ambiances subtly. You can duck them and have them swell back in from out of the way, and you can layer them. So those are some specific techniques for highlighting space. And yeah, we've also talked a little bit about ways of highlighting the texture or the timbre. You know, you can augment what's already there. If something's let's say something was recorded poorly, maybe it has a sort of distorted quality that if you were going to try to combat that, you were never going to make it sound like it was recorded pristinely in a pro studio. Well, maybe instead you go the other way and you highlight that. You use some distortion, you use some saturation, you use like a really trashy spring reverb or something, and you make it sound like that was the idea. And for me, especially making retrowave music, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think I'm actually going to call it here. There are a couple more elements, but I won't go into them because I think I've made my point or points, which is again just to say that if you try to make your arrangements simple, you are going to leave room for each individual element to stand out, as well as the ambiances and the spaces that you used around those elements to stand out. And you can use all manner of techniques to enhance the unique texture or timbre, like distortion, like filtering, things like that, as well as to enhance the space that you have chosen, like ducking and layering ambiances and the like. So I hope that this has been helpful or at least interesting to you, and I hope that you've taken a few things that you can use in your own production. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like and maybe think about subscribing, because I try to put out as many videos as I can, doing just what I did here, sort of doing production breakdowns and talking about my techniques and philosophy for making retrowave music in particular. So please feel free to subscribe, give this video a like if you want to find it later in your liked videos. Leave me a comment if you have any questions or you'd like to discuss this further. And until next time, I hope you'll be well, keep it retro, be good to one another, and I'll see you soon. Take it easy, guys.